Welcome to Horticulture, where a group of extension professionals and plant people talk about the business, production, and joy of planting seeds and helping them grow. Join us as we explore the culture of horticulture. Hey everybody, what is up? How's everybody doing? Josh, Ray?
Wonderful.
Yeah? Feeling good today?
Magnificent.
I'm going to ask you all
the
the consistent weekly question, and it was one that I have had asked of me relatively recently, and it is what constitutes a good mug? So we all, and I'm looking at us right now, you can't see us listeners, but I can see them, and we all have mugs in our hand of coffee or tea or whatever it is. So what constitutes a good mug for you? Like if you're going to spend money on a mug, what are you thinking about? Cat dad, Josh's cat dad.
Yeah. Something clever on it is good and doesn't have a hole in it and keeps drink warm or cool, whatever.
So very, very basic
Low
requirements.
bar, but
pretty much the definition of a mug. Pretty much the definition of a mug.
Amusing,
hold liquid and keep it warm. Okay.
Plus amusing like something.
Okay,
on it,
amusing.
Something provocative.
Got it.
Yeah, cat dad.
Ray, what about you?
I like heavy mugs. Here lately, I've been into like the hand-thrown mugs. We've got some local mug places that do their own pottery work, but they're heavy. But Josh already said it. It kind of insulates naturally pretty well. So it keeps the and I never thought about this before in this way, but it keeps like, whatever's hot in there hot longer, my coffee, tea, whatever. So I like a mug like that. And one that's got a good thumb thing, that a good thumb, the perfect thumb hole.
Yeah.
That's important.
I've got it.
What do you mean?
The handle.
The handle.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I got you.
And there's actually on a lot of the hand-thrown mugs, you'll notice they have a thumb peg on top to rest your thumb. Because they're heavy, they provide a little bit of leverage. So I'm enjoying that on all my pottery mugs.
I have small hands, so it has to have either like a good like handle that I can slip like half of my hand through to really hold a big mug, or has to be kind of small enough for me to be able to hold with one hand.
Get a grip.
But also be big enough to hold all the coffee that I require as a daily allowance.
Volume.
It seems like
I have some
volume.
Yeah.
I have some soup mugs that I drink coffee out of. They're designed to hold like a standard.
Do they have like the two holes on the side where you like?
Yeah, they need to, because they're just right for about half a 12-cup pot of coffee will fit in one. It's perfect.
I have a mug that I use every morning for coffee. Like it is my coffee mug. I use it every morning that I'm at work. So I have my weekday coffee mug, and I have my weekend, and then I have a travel one as well. Wow, so I have am I drinking while I get ready? Am I drinking it on the couch, or am I drinking it in the car? So those are 3 separate mugs, and they are very different
traveling mug
in style.
We didn't talk about that. A mug that will fit very well into the console of your vehicle. That's important as well. Travel mug. Good point.
Yeah.
Good
I have 3 different ones, man. Just gotta have it.
Yeah.
Because
I'm needy, a mug, I guess, for every occasion. And if you're Josh,
what? That's a really good segue. Mug for every occasion. Also plants for every occasion, right? Because we are the horticulture, not the mug culture podcast. So we are, I promise, talking about plants today. And
eventually.
What we're talking about today stems from a listener bringing it up, and it was something that we were kind of going to talk about a little bit, and so it gave us some more specifics to think about. And so we're talking about cultivars and specific, heirlooms versus hybrids versus all these different things. How do you select the apple tree that's right for you? This sort of situation, and I think a lot of the things we're talking about today are bits and pieces from other episodes that we've talked about, right? We talk about disease, we've talked about insects, but we're kind of bringing all of that in to make good selections for your vegetables or your flowers or your fruit trees, kind of this whole big spectrum of, at least that was my plan. I don't know what you guys were going to talk about, but that's what I was going to talk about.
I've heard of it. No, I'm lying. This is the plan. This is the plan.
Very, very diving a little bit more into the science, the biology of it all, which is, of course, where you're going to hear me talk the most, because I'm
Yeah, I was going to say, Alexis, I guess a good place to start would be framing the conversation before we talk about selecting specific varieties for like fruit and veggies and other things. There's a lot of garden terms that I see in magazines that I'm getting constantly this time of year.
Mhm,
Lots of words on there related to specifically like home vegetable gardens.
mhm.
But can you kind of throw out some common terms there and go over those so we can get started off on the right track, Alexis?
Yeah, sure. So I think first, I always think of things right as a timeline, point A to point C kind of thing. So I think it's easy to talk about heirlooms first, and heirlooms are a very big buzzword that we talk about right now. And so
Good
these
stuff.
are
Yeah.
it's sort of like the word natives, right? That the word heirloom often to me is people who love natives love heirlooms. They seem to go together, but these are these varieties of fruits, vegetables, whatever. If, there's flowers, there's all kinds of these things that have been around, have been grown and cultivated by humans for a long period of time, and they have very reliable, stable characteristics to them. So if you go by like purple Cherokee tomato seeds, it's a very popular one, or pink brandywine, or ones we hear a lot. You're going to keep getting pink brandywine. Now, granted, tomatoes are mostly self-pollinated, so that's the reason why they're not crossing with a bunch of other things. But these are ones that your grandparents grew, as an example, like are what we think of heirlooms. And then we get into where I see the most confusion are hybrids versus GMOs. And so those are two very different things. So hybrids are crossing, and I like to give the example of like a golden doodle. So to make a golden doodle a dog, right, you have a poodle and a golden retriever, and they mom and dad come together and they make a little golden doodle, right? That golden doodle is a hybrid of its parents. And the same can be true. We have been hybridizing plants for thousands of years.
And
It's
they've been
just
hybridizing themselves.
they've
Yeah.
been
Mhm.
hybridizing themselves, right? Usually when we say hybrid, we're referring to human interaction there, but like
Right.
technically speaking, right, a watermelon that accidentally crosses with a cucumber, because they can cross, they're both cucurbits, the product of that would probably not be anything very tasty, but it is a hybrid of its parents, right? So that is what a hybrid is. And we often see names like in those seed catalogs, we'll see the names with like some numbers next to them, like F1,
Mhm.
H1, things like that. And that is just a way of identifying that it's a hybrid. And so then we talk about GMOs, which are genetically modified. And so that would be like instead of a poodle and a golden retriever crossing, we are taking a poodle and we are inserting squid genes so that that poodle can change colors, right? So we are modifying it at a DNA level. Most of our vegetables are not GMO. And you would certainly
Mhm.
know that. So I just want everybody to like, I get a lot of people who are very concerned. They're like, oh, I don't want hybrids. I don't want that bad. And I'm like, people have been hybridizing plants since, like that's how we
Quite some
got
time.
here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Like pink brandywine, the tomato that's an heirloom, we consider it an heirloom now, probably was a hybrid at one point. Well, it was because tomatoes have been bred and cultivated from wild nightshade plants. So technically our heirlooms were at one time hybrids. But we
Oh,
I digress. I get
before
very
we,
emotional about that.
For
I know Alexis
trivia's,
is
I was
she's
gonna say for
getting worked
trivia's
up. I
sake,
love it.
you
Yeah,
mentioned
yeah.
like that on a seed variety, it'll say like F1.
Mhm.
Yeah.
For trivia's sake, what does the F stand for?
I don't know, I used to know that. I don't know that now, I'll be honest with
Josh
you.
knows, I
Some
bet.
I hope
Phil-
Josh knows and that I don't look like a complete idiot, just blank airspace on the air.
right, right. Filial, which
First?
yeah, no, filial. It means of or due
Filial.
from a son or daughter. But the F1, also the one means the first generation of crossing,
Mhm,
right? Because
mhm,
there's
Yeah.
this association with when you take two things that are different and breed them together, that very first
mhm,
generation gets what they call hybrid vigor, and you kind of tend to
mhm.
get
Tends to be the
the
best.
best of
Yeah.
the best of both worlds.
The F1s are
Right.
like the super crosses. They're like the good original OGs
And so
of
Hmm.
the
sometimes
plant
you'll see
world.
like F2, which would be
Mhm.
This,
the golden doodle crosses with another first generation golden doodle and gets, a second
Maybe
generation
not
golden
might
doodle.
quite as much hybrid vigor in some
Right. And
mhm.
so
cases. In some
we
cases.
which leads me to pointing out that you can often, unless it's patented, save seed from. We'll talk
Mhm.
a little bit about seed saving today, but save seed from those hybrids, but they are not usually as good because of that hybrid vigor. We're not getting the best traits of mom and the best traits of dad. We're getting the mediocre traits of the child, and now I feel
Right.
bad about myself. So
Yeah. Well, that first generation of vigor fades away, and then you're starting
Mhm.
to get, yeah, just kind of less emphasis on the best of both worlds and more emphasis on just kind of what is the
The way I've had it
background.
put to
Mhm.
me, you don't live in the castle anymore, you live in the village after
Yeah.
a while. So, yeah.
Right, right, right.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose.
And
Well,
then,
so
But
so,
what do
you
they
can
refer
hybridize your own
to?
plants. Yeah,
Hmm.
sorry. I get excited. I'm so excited.
Well, so would you say that the alternative to open to I just gave away the game there, but the alternative
you
to
did.
hybridized would be open pollinated? And what does that mean?
Yeah, so open pollinated would be that nature is essentially doing that hybridization for you. So it's like wind or insect sometimes. It could be water, whatever it is. It's taking the pollen from this one plant and bringing it to the stamen of the other. And so,
Or the same like an heirloom, like heirlooms being open pollinated because they're just breeding
Mhm.
back to the same variety.
Right,
So they
but
stay
not
the same, I guess,
not
yeah.
all plants are. This is where it kind of starts to get confusing. Like not all plants need open pollination. So
Mhm,
corn as an example is wind pollinated, so it can
mhm,
cross, which is why when you're planting heirloom corn, you need to be careful that, if you're surrounded
Mhm.
by someone growing grain corn, you don't want your grain corn neighbor to pollinate your good sweet corn, because you're going to have really gross corn, right? So even though you planted sweet corn, it can cross, and you're eating corn seeds, right? Let's
right,
remember.
right.
um, so it can be not as good. So you want sweet corn to pollinate sweet corn, but not all plants need that. So tomatoes, as an example, and which is why it's a lot easier to save seeds from something like a tomato, because they are mostly self-pollinated. Sometimes you get a bee that goes in there and gets in there a little early
Mhm,
before that happens, or you yourself can cross and hybridize plants. But open pollinated, we see a lot with like cucurbits. Your zucchini, like I said, can
Yeah.
cross with a cantaloupe technically if you wanted it to. And so that's why people tend to use row covers if they're collecting seed, and more careful with those open pollinated type plants.
And that has a big impact on, and seed savers I find are pretty good about, if they're effective seed savers, then they've been doing it for a while. They really know what they can and cannot save out of their garden effectively. And even if they're doing something like a sweet corn, they're very careful to only grow that variety in a small space. If they have large acreage, of course, they could grow two different sweet corn varieties that are isolated enough through space to still keep those true to top. But most gardeners, I find that if they are seed savers, are pretty knowledgeable in this discussion that we're having today. It's the seed savers. I love talking to them. I mean, the tomatoes and peppers that come back more true to top, that's more commonly saved. But when you get into vine crops and things like corn, much more care needs to be taken
Hmm.
to keep two distinct parents from crossing, because that's essentially what's happened, what's happening there. And Alexis, I want a golden doodle seed. I want. You said that crossing. I'm seeing this golden doodle seed. Is that like a donut seed? We joked about that earlier. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it's just like it makes the most sense for people. Like dog breeding is such a
yeah.
like a
That
right.
does
normal
make
thing, or
sense.
horses or whatever.
It's a
And
good
so I use
example.
golden doodle because those
I like
two
that.
are very different. It
Very
just
Mhm.
popular. Yeah,
Yeah, it
yeah.
brings, like, when you say you have a hybrid dog, people would freak out, but like
Well,
that's what it
it's
is.
like the terminology usually is different for animals. They talk about crossing, right? Rather
Yeah.
than like
Whatever, it should all be the same.
Hybrid vigor is the same.
Say you
Mhm.
grow, I often find myself, because I'm used to
You
talking about
grow
plants, right? Growing
corgis.
crops, growing I grow oh, yeah, they're growing goats out there, and I'm like, "Oh, I mean,
Mhm.
I guess they're technically raising them, but you all know what I mean." So, that's how you know a plant person versus a an animal person. But I think also what you will see, and so speaking about seed catalogs and some of these things that you see in there that can be confusing, there's some other than F1, those hybrid names. There's things like All America Selection. So sometimes you'll see the term AAS, which stands for All American Selection. These are winners. So these are plants that have been hybridized. There are no GMOs in this. So this can be anything from your petunias to vegetables, peppers, tomatoes, kind of this really wide spread of different things that have been tested around a region as well as around the United States. And so, like an example, our Arboretum at University of
Hmm.
Kentucky does trials for AAS. And so they get these plants sent to them from that organization, and they have to plant them in a certain way because it's a research trial. And then the arboretum and whoever is getting these plants, we used to do them at the extension office as well,
Hmm.
would report back on, okay, I only watered them once a week and they did really well, or they really needed deadheading, or the Japanese beetles attacked them, whatever that looks like, how much fruit you got off of them, fruit, veggies, whatever. So there's these research trials done all over the United States on these plants, and then there's data collected, and then they say to you, hey, this variety of pepper does really well anywhere in the US. Sometimes they say it does really well in this region. And that can be really helpful when you're looking for a plant. You're like, it's really overwhelming. When you open a book and there's 100 different types of peppers,
Mm.
of hot peppers, it can be really overwhelming to select the one that's best for you. So sometimes that can make your job a little bit easier because you're like, well, I know it's a regional winner for my area of the country, so it's going to be good, you know, assuming you take care of it, that is.
There is different levels of winners in there, and I think, what is it? Performance. There's the gold medal, and then the regional winners, and every single one of those are kind of the cream of the crop.
Mhm.
The AAS is such an interesting organization. I think more people know them for their flowers, but they also do vegetables, and
Mhm.
they're the oldest organization of their type in the U.S. From 1932 on. They've been doing this every single year. I think Kentucky has two listed. Boone County, maybe Arboretum. It's
Mhm.
associated with an extension service up in Boone County. And then, of course, the UK Arboretum that you just now mentioned, Alexis. But such an awesome group. And they're absolutely one of my go to that I look for when I'm trying to make planting decisions personally, even. And it's also a group that I direct a lot of people to look for those AAS winners.
Mhm.
There are 80 plus, trials going on in the U.S. at any one time from this organization. It's an old organization. They're very well organized, and they do a great job. That's all they do, isn't it? Is flowers and vegetables. I don't know
Mhm.
that they get into anything else.
I don't think
It's
they
an
do
awesome group.
shrubs and stuff like
I
that.
don't think so.
So you're looking more at like bedding plants. I think they do some perennials, like
Oh,
herbaceous
do they?
perennials.
Okay.
They used to, at least a few of them, but mostly annuals, whether that's vegetable annuals or annual flowers are kind of their predominant ones. But I want to say they have some like AAS, echinacea, and some like that. But maybe I'm making that up. Don't quote me.
Yeah, I'm not for sure. The thing I love about them also is they are not. I've had people approach me and say the AAS company. I'm like, well, it's not a company.
No.
Another cool thing about them is it's a nonprofit.
Hmm.
So they typically, I consider them almost like the Consumer Reports of the plant science world as far as trials go, and being non-biased. They're not affiliated with any one
Right. The
particular seed
non-bias
company.
is
Yeah.
really important. They can
Yes.
often be confused with proven winners, right? Because we hear
Mhm.
Yes.
AAS winners, and a lot of
Yes.
people confuse them with proven winners, which is a company in itself. So you can buy a
I think that's
proven
where it comes
winner
from. Yeah.
shrub or tree. So I think that's sometimes the confusion. And this isn't to say that only AAS are the good ones. But what is cool is you can look back to see some of the winners over the past, like
They've
since
been going for
1932,
so
like they have
long.
them.
Yeah.
But it's not to say that those are the only ones or even necessarily the best ones. Those are just the ones that research is being done on.
It's one good source as you're trying to
Mhm.
make planting decisions.
You can feel
If
confident in it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a really good one. That's a
Yeah.
really good one.
But for Kentucky, so for extension, and I have found these for I've found these for North Carolina, all the county states that are surround us. So I know that they have these for states that surround us from the extension services. They probably have them for probably all 50 states, if I had to guess. But I know here at UK, we have a list of varieties for vegetables as well as home fruit. And so when you get into commercial, a lot of them will be similar, but they have different kind of goals and different standards with
Yeah,
how they prune and do things like that. But I think for a lot of our people, that are listening in their home or small commercial scale, so this can apply to you. But there are some great fact sheets that are on these good varieties that we can recommend because they have things like disease resistance or they are adaptable to our soil. And we just talked about natives and talking about how great natives are. It's kind of like that version for your annual production. And I use these a lot. I don't know about you
Yeah,
guys.
I use those for references a lot. And one that I'll just throw out that I use a lot. And when you go and find this, you will notice that it's vegetable cultivars for Kentucky gardens, and the letters to look that up further is ID-133. It's just a publication number that we give things, but once again, it's called Vegetable Cultivars for Kentucky Gardens. You will notice that the last time that that was significantly updated was 2013. Even though it is somewhat dated, it is still super relevant. All of the varieties that are listed there, it may not have the latest releases that are unproven from specific seed companies, but a ton of research went into this publication. I refer to it all the time, even though it's over 10 years old now. It
Mm-hmm.
is my basis of recommendations for Kentucky gardens as far as specific vegetable cultivars that are well tested, tried, and true. And as Alexis already said, there's a lot of great information beyond just recommended cultivars. It also goes into a lot of detail. It's one of the reasons that it takes so long to produce this publication, but they go into a lot of detail on the disease package that each cultivar has, what it's resistant to, and the level of resistance in some cases. So, a ton of great information. There's lots of, Josh, I know you're going to get excited. There's lots of tables in this publication. They've
Yes.
got data organized very well. It's a very dense publication. It's just a few pages, but the level of information in this publication is pretty incredible. But once again, vegetable cultivars for Kentucky gardens. Look that up if you're new to gardening or just looking for more information on very specific varieties that do well in our area of the state, because all the research that went into this publication is all local to Kentucky for the most
Mm-hmm.
part. So it's a great publication and one that I use every week in the spring. It's a good one.
Yeah, and it's really got everything. It's got asparagus, kind of all the way through watermelon. And even just looking through this, like you said, it is 11 years old now, but pretty much all of these that I'm looking at are still available, which is good, right? It tells you that people
Yeah,
are growing these, it's popular. And maybe there's a couple that's not. And if you're not sure, if you're like, I really want to try this variety, maybe it's an AAS winner, or maybe not, and you just see this cool heirloom or something that you want to try, because these are mostly going to be hybrids, I believe, on this list. But you can compare and contrast them, right? So you're going to plant a certain, a type of onion that you saw, a new onion variety, and compare it to
yeah,
one that, we have done research on that says is a good variety for Kentucky, and compare and contrast those. And you might find a new one, and that's great. But this can help with the overwhelm that is seed catalogs, because I don't know about you all. I still get overwhelmed by seed catalogs, and I'm supposed to know what I'm doing.
absolutely.
So,
I'm
Right, right.
prone to anything with a pretty picture. So yeah, I
oh,
am a
it'll get you,
sucker
man.
for
Oh,
a
those
good
pictures.
picture. But maybe even what the picture doesn't tell you, that it's only for sandy soils and very dry environments. If you
Right,
have a wet year, it's going to collapse with
right.
diseases. It
It's
doesn't say that, but it has a pretty picture. So some of those are pretty specific. But before
yeah,
we
and
move too deep, I know there's some other publications we can talk about. And one thing I kind of wanted to bring up is, you mentioned heirlooms earlier, Alexis, and we're talking about cultivars here in some cases, cultivated varieties. That's sort of you slam the two words together. Cultivated variety is cultivar.
Hmm.
But some considerations for those growers that are interested in heirlooms, because there's lots of order sources for heirloom seeds. We talked about disease resistance, which is part of the information that's in this publication, this garden publication we're talking about currently. But heirlooms are a little different. Is that correct? If you've never grown an heirloom and you put an heirloom tomato on your garden, you kind of have to be cautious of that and be aware that maybe some of the disease resistance have not been bred into those
mhm,
heirlooms.
mhm,
Heirlooms have a bunch of awesome traits. I
Hmm.
love heirlooms myself, but I know that I have to be kind of cautious and understand that heirlooms may not be as resistant to certain diseases. Did you guys find that to be the case? If
yeah, I
you're
think we talked about this with sort of natives when we were talking about when you are thinking about what are your goals for planting natives, like, and there's a lot of breeding that's been done to create bigger, showier flowers in native plants.
Mhm.
But the pass off can be that they are not great nectar sources, or something along those lines. And the same is sort of true that we have seen in heirlooms, is that heirlooms usually taste really good. They save their seeds save really well. Some of them do have great disease resistance, which is where we
Yeah,
pulled
some
disease
do.
resistance from when we
Yeah.
made these hybrids, right? So it's not to say that all of them
But
are
they may
bad.
not a tomato may not ship across the country as well because the
Right.
wall is more thin, for instance,
Exactly,
just an
exactly.
example, yeah.
And so the goals of those heirlooms and the people who were growing those was very different than a lot of the goals that we have now. And, our climate has changed from what our grandparents had. So something that may have never gotten a blight when my grandparents grew it, would the same plant would get a blight, and this on maybe even the same farm, because the climate is very different. We're much wetter, more humid than we used to be. And so, we know we're in a whole new zone now. We've talked about that before. Kentucky's in zone 7 and 7B, where we used to be solid
Yeah. 6A
6A.
and B, yeah.
And so
I'll throw
that,
another one at you, Alexis.
mhm.
High tunnels and heirlooms. Oh, that's
Mm,
exciting. Boy, that's trial and error when you go, because then you're not only dealing with a different moisture profile, you're dealing with a different heat profile.
mhm,
And a lot of it's trial and error with heirlooms. I know some
mhm,
information's coming out about which heirlooms you could possibly use, but boy, that
mhm.
gets really interesting when you try to grow heirlooms in a situation where they have never been tested in. They
Right,
may do
right.
very well in a field, even on a commercial scale. If you try to take an heirloom that was developed mainly for a home garden planting with 8 plants and put that in a planting of 2 to 3, 4 acres, whatever many acres, it may not behave the same. That's not to say it's a bad plant. That means you're putting it in a different scenario where
Mhm.
it may perform unexpectedly.
Mhm.
So
So just when you're dealing with heirlooms, just know there may be more TLC needed. So you need to have eyes on the plant a bit more. You can't just let them go because they don't necessarily have the quote unquote immune system that some of our hybrids tend to have now because they've been bred in a newer age with newer climate and things. So I don't know. I Some people tend to get a little defensive when you talk about
Sure.
heirlooms, like you're
Mhm.
and don't be, because there are plenty of great heirlooms out there that do have good disease and insect resistance. That's where we got it from. We had to get it from somewhere when we hybridized. But also remember that the climate and the area is different than when our grandparents grew it. And so that it's nothing personal, heirloom people. I love heirlooms. I'm just saying it's not, there are benefits to growing some of these hybrids if you need to be a little more hands off, or if you're organic, right? We don't have as many sprays. Maybe you're growing in a high tunnel where you don't have as many options, whether organic or not, on what you spray. So you really need that disease resistance. And I think it's especially important when we start talking about perennial plants. So when
Mhm.
we also have a publication from, it's a little bit newer, 2019, on home fruit varieties. And so we go through, we don't recommend almonds here, but technically it says almond on there, and it says we do not recommend them here. But almonds, apples, and a lot of them are on there that we don't recommend, but they're on there to tell you, hey, we don't recommend this, which can be
which that's
very
good knowledge to
helpful.
have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
May save you some
Honeycrisp,
time.
don't grow Honeycrisp here. I don't know how many times I have to tell people, don't do it. It will
It's
never
so
do
sweet.
anything.
It's so sweet.
Don't do it. It's, yeah. But, there's even things like currants, cherries, elderberries, figs. There's a lot of things that we can grow. And it's, I would say, really important to look for disease resistance on those perennial
Yeah,
crops because
absolutely.
they're
Mhm.
not moving and they're going to be
Right.
there a while, or at least
This
that's
is
your goal.
this
Yeah.
is absolutely my go-to publication, Alexis. That home fruit variety recommendations 2019 that you're referring to.
Mhm.
The call number for that is HortFax 3003. If you're here in Kentucky, if you're not in Kentucky, check with your local extension service in the state that you're in, and the odds are they're going to have something equivalent to this. But this is such an amazing publication to me because it not only contains variety informations and whether or not almonds we recommend you for growing, but it also contains something like super important to me, and that's average ripening date in Kentucky. That's really
Mm,
important for homeowners to know that. And kind of some of the uses for the different varieties. If it's apples, can you use it for sauce and freezing, or one or the other? It's all really good stuff to know. It has special comments on each variety, that if there's a special consideration or use for that variety. But man, that's an awesome publication. And there's so much research over so many years went into that publication, but it's a good one. And I consider that one really up to date as being 2019, even though it's a couple years old, because once again, we're talking about perennials
Mhm.
that don't change quite as often. This is a good one. It is the
And you need, and
go-to.
Mhm.
you want that research to show 5-10 years worth of research, right? Because that's the goal with a lot of our trees and our perennial fruits and nuts, is to have them for that long a time. So you want someone to be like, yeah, after 10 years it was fruiting just as well as it was and it's still alive. That's what you want. So that's why you will see much bigger gaps in time
Yeah.
on a lot of
Mhm.
those perennial
And
crops.
a
But Josh,
perennial,
you've
yeah.
worked on a pub,
Yeah, it's
not
very
this one, but
similar to the
similar.
yeah, it's similar to the one that Ray has mentioned. It's Hort Fact Sheet 3002, but is also like a year newer. It was updated in 2020, and it's focused on those same fruit and nut cultivars that are recommended for commercial production in Kentucky, but where to find them as far as nursery
Mhm.
sources.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, very
Nice.
like extensive kind of article that also there's a companion kind of interactive map to it, so you can open it up and find close sources if that's what you're looking for. But it's a
Mhm.
nationwide map, so you can
Nice.
once you find one of these recommended sources or one of these recommended cultivars, you can find the source. And it
And
also
you said that
in
covers fruit and nuts, Josh? Fruit and
yes,
nuts on that?
fruit and
Okay.
nuts, and it also does list the disease resistance and stuff like that in it as well. But as far as like, I would say for looking up and finding the cultivar you want, the one that Ray mentioned, and then once you kind of settle on some cultivars, this one is kind of the companion of
Mhm.
where to get it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's
The
awesome.
veggie one we talked about actually has a list in it as well on Kentucky seed companies as well as catalog seed companies. So, if, again, where to find these, because that's always the second question. It can be a
Right.
lot easier with veggies, but it can be really hard with fruits and nuts to find these kind of specific varieties. And one other thing that I love that we kept talking about disease resistance and things that insect resistant, things like that, but ripening. So with things like fruit in your vegetables as well, but ripening can be so really important. So the same
Mm.
reason we don't recommend you grow apricots here is because they bloom too early, and with our late frosts, the tree survives. The tree is beautiful, but you will never get fruit off
It's
of it.
like peaches, only worse. Yeah.
Yeah.
If
Actually,
that's possible.
one of our specialists, I'm gonna pick on him, Dr. Besson. He has a beautiful apricot tree in his yard that blooms beautifully, very healthy trees, had it for 10 years. It's never got fruit on it because every year those blooms are killed. And, he's a plant nerd like us. So he just enjoys the tree. But it's something where when you're looking at, as I was scrolling through the pub while I was listening, looking at things, that's really important because there are some that won't bloom till late and we may freeze 9 times out of 10, and you won't
Mhm.
get a crop. So maybe staying away from those. Also, from an insect perspective, we have an insect
Mm.
now. We need to do an episode on spotted wing Drosophila, which is
Mhm.
a tiny, tiny little fruit fly that will get into your soft fruits. So berries are really, really susceptible to them. So the recommendations we have now are very different than the ones we had before spotted wing Drosophila, which has only come up in the past like 10 years or so,
Yeah.
because
Mhm.
we only recommend fruits that are being picked before spotted wing comes out.
Yes.
And it's not to say that those other plants aren't good. They're great. They might adapt really well to the weather, but you're going to have tiny little maggots in your fruit. So if you don't spray for them, so try looking at those types of things are also really important when you think about cultivars. And again, if your head is spinning right now and you're overwhelmed, that's why we have great tables for you to look at. Because it can get really overwhelming to look at it all and piece through those. And then, you may have the table, and if you come down to a couple varieties and you're trying to pick between them, that's when you call your extension office and you say, hey, can I get some opinion about, this one versus this one? And we can, if we don't know, just because we've done it before, we can contact a specialist who maybe did the research themselves, or we can do some more digging for you to help you pick which one's best, especially if you're doing a commercial planting.
Yeah, it is a lot to take in at one time, and commercial applications are a lot different. The considerations are different. The variety recommendations are going to be different versus homeowners. And along that same lines, another publication that I'll throw out, and I don't want to confuse things because what we talked about earlier was the home garden variety recommendations. What I'll mention now is ID 36. That's the
Mm,
Vegetable Production Guide for Commercial Growers, specifically in Kentucky. It's just been updated. It's updated on a 2-year cycle.
mhm,
And that is the go to information. It's not only variety recommendations, which it does have that in there. It's got
mhm,
insect control recommendations, fertility recommendations, and specific crop profiles on all the common crops that are grown in Kentucky. It is the one stop shop for
mhm,
commercial vegetable producers in the state, and it's one of our most popular publications there at the office.
mhm.
It's a smaller number of course, commercial growers, but this is the one publication they want every single time. So
And we
don't
have a
forget about
fruit
that one.
version of that as well. So if you're wanting to
Yes.
do commercial fruit, and I will
Mhm.
say that, it's one of those like I always think of it as like, is it a square versus a rectangle situation where I don't necessarily recommend commercial varieties to homeowners because, like Ray was saying earlier, can behave really differently in a commercial scale. And so, you know, if you're a homeowner, it's not to say you can't grow those, but also there's a lot bigger of a world open to you if you're going 5 tomato plants versus 3,000 tomato
Sure,
plants.
yeah.
Your goals are different. And so you don't want to miss out on maybe some really great varieties that'll be good for 5 to 10 because you're looking at the varieties that are recommended for 1,000. And so, for you all, I would recommend those homeowner ones just because, like, man, You'll miss out on some good
Yeah,
stuff.
the homeowners, there's a lot bigger leeway there. I feel like commercial producers, like the rubric, I pick on tomatoes all the time, and it's not a bad thing, but tomatoes have to have a cell wall that can stand up to shipping and packing operations. Whereas a homeowner, that's just not a consideration. And a
Mhm.
homeowner may plant a commercial tomato variety, and it's fine if they pick it fairly early in its life stage, but they may be surprised if they let it go to full maturity and it's got a very thick wall that they're not expecting versus something like an heirloom Oxheart variety or something like that with a very thin wall. But yeah, every variety has its own use. And that's why we try to differentiate on the discussion here. If it's for homeowners or
Mhm.
if it's for commercial producers, it's always good to know that. So.
Yeah.
One thing we've not touched bases on here in the discussion, and something that is pretty unique to the Extension Service, is what we call the Horticulture Research Reports.
Oh,
I
yeah.
need to mention that here. Just because it is actually new knowledge. It's oftentimes knowledge, well, it is knowledge that is generated through the Cooperative Research Extension Program in your state. And in our case here in Kentucky, we have these reports that come out pretty often. I don't know, guys, do they come out every year? I don't see them every year. The research reports, the most recent one, and there may be one that's more recent. The most recent one that I have printed there at my office, I think is 2021, but lots of great information in there. And all the information that's generated in there, it goes beyond varieties. The last time I referred to one of those, I think I was looking up, salt mitigation in high tunnels. There was a whole
Mhm.
research report on that. But it's report on new information from research that was done through our organization. That's pretty exciting to me because it's information that you're not going to see online right
Mhm.
away, that you're going to commonly find by using your favorite search engine. But you can get that information a little bit quicker by calling our office and requesting, in this case, the fruit and vegetable annual research report, the most recent one that we have. Lots of great information in there. It covers fruit and vegetable production, tree and shrub production, greenhouse and floriculture production, and landscape horticulture is the last category. That's kind of the four big categories they cover, and that's exciting information to me, because it is new and fresh information.
Right.
So
So it's not necessarily you're going to that for something very specific. You're going to see what it has to offer. So I think
if you're
that
a
that's a way.
commercial producer, yes, you're probably
Right.
reading those with interest. You're looking at the
Of what you
topics
can
and
change or, yeah,
yes.
what you can update. If you look up the one from 2016, you will see one done by yours truly. So
What
just,
was that
Was
piece
that
that you did in the
cucumbers?
2016 one?
yeah. So
Yeah,
I looked at
cucumbers.
alternative media sources for hydroponic cucumber production in a greenhouse. That was
Pretty
my
high level
master's
stuff, yeah.
research.
Pretty high
Yeah.
Mhm.
level stuff.
Yeah. I almost died when I with the sulfuric acid.
Oh, I should not
um,
laugh. I take it back. Somber
yeah, I
tone.
had sulfuric acid blow up in my face.
Oh
So,
gosh.
fun fact about
Cool.
that. But
Was that
I'm
one of
fine.
those, like,
Everything's fine.
adding things in the wrong order? Like
Yep.
adding
Yep. No
yeah,
one told
okay.
me no one told me when I was prepping because it was hydroponic production, right? So you give the plant everything that it needs, and we were looking at cedar mulch. So I'm sorry, I'm getting off topic, but I mean, I spent a lot of my life in
Traumatic
that greenhouse.
experience.
So
Mhm.
just fun
Right.
fact, we looked at something just like a basic potting mix and versus a more of a barky media that actually I think it was called Barky Beaver, more of a
Oh yeah.
barky landscape
Mhm.
nursery type media. Yeah, remember that big
Mhm.
pile at South Farm? Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
right.
And then in comparison to like a strip cedar mulch by, just literally the stuff that came out of a mill, just
Mhm.
their crap pile. And so looking at, can I grow cucumbers in a hydroponic way in these different medias, and because those media is really expensive, and so how do I get better? And coconut coir I think was the other thing we used. But
Mhm.
anyways, if you would like to read up about that, the 2016
The
crop research
2016 version.
report, you can
Yeah.
read
Mhm.
on that, and you can find my data.
And that's what it is. It's lots of data on all
Yeah.
these research product. And I always find those interesting when one of those we get a flag on email that one's available. I go and kind of page through that. I'm not always interested in every single topic,
Mm-hmm.
but there are always topics. I'm like, oh gosh, they're reporting on results from something that's never been done before, or there's very little information. And that's pretty exciting to me as kind of a field facing practitioner. In extension, we work
Mm-hmm.
with actual producers out in communities. It's pretty exciting to me because it gives us more tools to work from. So
Mm-hmm.
it's good information. It's not only available to us as extension agents, but it's also available to folks out in communities. But you can find them online, or you can request a copy through your local extension office. Either way, they can be somewhat thick, somewhat substantial. So you may want a printed copy. You can request those. Either way.
And if
Yeah.
your county agent doesn't know what those are, find us and we will get them for you. They will know what they are. I'm just teasing, but
Yeah.
sometimes we don't deal with them a
It's not
ton.
frequently requested.
It's not
We don't get
frequently
a
requested.
no, they're
So
not frequently
just remember, you
requested.
can always contact us at horticulturepodcast at l.uky.edu. Again, that's in the show notes, and you can shoot that email and we will just send you a link to that. Or if you
Yeah.
need a paper copy, we can mail you one. So that's not a problem.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, but that's exciting. Well, anything else? Any questions that you all might have, as listeners? If you all have questions about varieties, or you're not sure what some letters mean or something like that, you can always reach out again to your local county extension office, or you can reach out to us on Instagram or via our email. We say this all the time, but we really do mean it. And when people have reached out and said we want to know about native plants, or we want to know about varieties and all these cool things, we try and hit those needs. And a lot of time they're already on our list, which is always exciting because we get to bump those up to the next most episode list. But any other thoughts you guys have?
No, I love the discussion. I mean, there's got to be some way of making decisions for what to plant, when to plant, and how to plant. And these are
Mhm.
just some of the tools that we use and that we recommend for others. So
Mhm.
there's lots of other sources of information, but these tend to be local that we gave you today, highly researched. So we feel pretty sound about the recommendations that we've mentioned today. So
Yeah.
Mhm.
So go with those recommendations, but then pick something to experiment with, because that's the
oh
fun,
yes,
right? Every
the
year I try and
1%.
pick something different to
Oh,
experiment with.
absolutely.
It keeps things fun and interesting. And sometimes it's really good. And sometimes you're like, wow, that was garbage. I should trust my extension agent.
Sometimes I always try new varieties, varieties that we have no information on. That's brand new. I want to. I want to be on the forefront of that in my home garden. I would not necessarily say make that statement commercially, but in my home garden, it's like the island of Dr. Moreau out there. It's like a zoo. There's one of everything, and it's nothing matches. So yeah, I have a zoo in my backyard, and I love it. But that's part of the fun of gardening.
I
So
call those my pet plants. Anytime I buy something for the farm that is like, I'm going to just experiment with it. And if it goes wrong, it's okay because it's my pet plant.
it's
That's
fine. It's
that's how
fine.
I need like a line item in my budget for my business of pet plants. So
Mhm.
Don't do that with your labradoodle, though. Don't do that with the earlier example that Alexis threw out. So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, Labradoodle, Golden Doodle, whatever it is,
yeah,
nothing
a
wrong with that.
doodle.
I have a straight species corgi, personally speaking, but
Oh,
Open
Josh is a
Purebred.
hybrid cat. Yeah.
Right.
Your cat was definitely open pollinated, that's for sure.
Naturally
Oh yeah,
hybridized.
yeah. Came in on the wind.
Yes, the wind blew and the cat came in the window. I love it.
Awesome. All right. Well, don't forget, always you can contact us, leave us a review if you want to know something more. If you just had a lot of fun, if you just want to tell Brett hello, we swap where we haven't kicked him out. He's just got some stuff going on, but he will be back to join us because he actually does like us, believe it or not. So, or at least he tells us he does. I assume he's
He
telling the
says so,
truth.
Yeah,
so
He
let's take
says
him at his
so.
I
word.
believe.
Yeah,
I
or at least
believe.
he likes talking to you
Yes.
all, the listeners. So we've got that going for us. Thank you all so much for being here with us today. And we hope that as we grow this podcast, you will grow with us and that you'll join us next week. Have a good one.